Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 399. We're almost at 400. I can't believe I've been podcasting for this long. I know that the podcast has changed and evolved and pivoted over the years, but I never would have guessed back in 2013 when I first started this thing that I'd be going for so long. So this is your host, Holly Worton, and I am back with another solo episode, 399. Today I'm going to talk about a topic that was inspired by a listener. I occasionally get listeners or readers of my books emailing me and getting in touch on social media and giving me ideas for topics. And I really welcome this. So if you've been listening to the podcast and you have a question for me, or there's something you'd like me to talk about, or I don't know, a topic, something that you'd like me to cover on this podcast, please let me know. I actually just got a really great email from one of my readers and listeners, and she gave me some compliments on last week's episode with Cara Wilde, and she said, I'd really like to hear about a couple of other things. So thanks to her, I've got an animal communicator coming on hopefully soon, and I'm looking for a crystal communicator, and I think I've identified someone, but I've got to check her out a little bit more before I reach out. So if you have any topics that I've already talked about but want to learn more about, please get in touch. Let me know. I love hearing from listeners. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com and get in touch. So, many months ago, perhaps a year ago, one of my listeners wrote in and said, I have some ideas for topics. And one of the things that he suggested was this. Here's what he said. We get something, many things, from hiking along trails. What do we give without realizing it? And what can we give consciously? And whenever I get topics from suggested topics, I copy and paste them into this Evernote file where I keep all of my ideas for guests and podcast topics and solo episodes, and it's all in one Evernote file. So I copied and pasted this in there, and I read it from time to time when I'm looking for a new topic, and I keep thinking about this one, and I keep thinking about this one. And this week, when I sat down to record this episode, I realized this was the week. Now is the time to have this conversation. I think this is a really interesting topic because we get so much from hiking. We get so much from running outdoors. We get so much from our outdoor adventures. I mean, if you listen to this podcast, you know I've talked so much about the opportunities for personal growth and personal development that we can get from getting outdoors and being outside. So we get so much. But what do we give without realizing it? And it actually took me a while to think about this. And before I do an episode, I always kind of Google the topic to see what people are saying about the topic. And I couldn't find anything. Like, no one else is talking about this, or maybe I just didn't know how to Google it. So I had to think. I think the most obvious thing that we give without realizing it is carbon dioxide from our breath. Every time we're outdoors, whether we're hiking, we're running, we're cycling, whatever, we're breathing, hopefully. And when we exhale, we are exhaling carbon dioxide, and that's really good stuff for trees and plants. And they take that and they breathe that in. So carbon dioxide is something that we give all the time, and we give constantly without realizing it. And that's actually a really good thing for trees and plants. What else do we give without realizing it? We give our voices, for better or for worse. I think that when we go out, and whether we're talking to the trees, as I do, or whether we're talking to a friend that we might be walking with, or whether we're talking to our dogs, if we bring a dog, like our voices kind of lend an extra layer of life to the forest, to the trails. And like I said, for better or for worse. I mean, some people speak at a normal, acceptable volume. Some people are really, really loud. And I don't know, I feel really bad when I complain about that. I mean, I only complain about it kind of like silently in my head, but some people are really, really loud. And they're screaming at their dog, or they're screaming at their kids, or they're screaming at each other. I don't know, like every once in a while when I go out, I'll be out in the woods in the middle of nowhere and it's quiet and I haven't seen people in a long time. And then all of a sudden I hear this, like someone's screaming for their dog to come back as they've let it off the lead and it's chasing after a deer and they're trying to get it back and dog's not paying attention because it's running after deer. And it's so jarring. And it just really disrupts the energy of the calm, quiet forest with the birds singing and the trees with their leaves rustling in the wind. It's really, really, really shocking for me sometimes. So I always try to be aware. Most of the time I'm alone in the outdoors, but when I did take groups on walks, I would always try to be aware of, my volume, our volume as a group. My group was really quiet. We would, have conversations and laugh and stuff, but we weren't rowdy and screaming. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Like when I go out into nature, I like to hear nature sounds and not people screaming sounds. But I also recognize the fact that, it's a place to have fun. It's a place to play. And that's absolutely valid too. So I don't want to sound like a complaining person by talking about this, but our voices are something that we give without realizing it. Again, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it can be a bit jarring. What else do we give? We give our gaze, our view of the surrounding nature, our appreciation of it, our perception of it. We are acknowledging the existence of these trails, all the stuff along the trails, as we experiencing it. We're also giving our energy. So as we're walking through a trail or running down a trail or cycling down a trail, we as living beings have energy and we're adding our energy to this outdoor space. We also give or leave footprints, which sometimes show up if the trail's muddy, and they don't usually show up as much if the trail's dry. But our footprints can sometimes cause erosion. If we are tromping through the mud and widen the trail by trying to get to the drier bits on the edges of the mud, and that can cause erosion, that can cause permanent widenings of the trail as more and more people do this. And that's something I think we've seen a lot this year with COVID and having so many more people out on the trails. And just the mud that we've had during the winter has just really destroyed a lot of trails. And I'm really curious to see what things are going to be like once we progress further into spring and then summer and the trails dry out a little bit more. What that's going to be like. Are we going to have, permanent damage to some of these trails, or is it going to recover? It will recover eventually, probably. But certainly our trails have seen more use than they ever have, probably, before. What else do we give without realizing it? Well, this is debatable, but dog waste. So most people that go walking with a dog will bag up their dog waste, and you're supposed to take it out with you. Some people don't. Some people just kind of flick it off to the side of the trail, which is okay, as long as no one's going to step in it and as long as it's not in farmland, but that's not technically what you're supposed to do. But some people bag up their dog poop and leave it at the side of the trail, or worse, flick it up into a tree where it hangs from the tree like a poopy Christmas tree ornament. I don't know. And that's really awful. So I say, obviously people who do this know they're doing it, but I don't know if they realize just how awful it is. So that's one thing we give or leave. Trash. Now I think some people do litter intentionally, but I think some people don't. I think some people just attach rubbish into the little pockets in their backpack and things fall out. I really don't think that all the trash that I see in the woods is intentional littering. So be really careful. If you've brought a disposable bottle of water, or you've eaten a bag of crisps, or you have candy wrapper or whatever, or gels. I remember one year I was walking the North Downs Way, and I happened to coincide the same day as a running event. There were all these runners eating their gels. So when you eat a gel packet, you have like a little tab at the top that you pull off, and you kind of suck the gel out through the top of the packet. But the little tab is really easy to lose. So you've really got to be careful about tucking it into your vest or putting it somewhere, hopefully that has a zipper so it doesn't fall out, because they're really lightweight and they just kind of flutter out everywhere. The North Downs Way was just littered with not just those little tabs, but gel packets. And I'm sure some people threw them down on purpose, but I'm sure a lot of people didn't. They were just running, they were in a hurry, they tucked it into their vest, and it fell out. So be careful that things don't fall off your pack or out of your pack. If you can secure rubbish in a zippered compartment, that's best. So again, trash is something that we give or leave without realizing it. Finally, and this is a good thing, publicity. By sharing our photos of nature on social media. So every time we go out for a walk, every time we go out for a run, every time we do something in the outdoors and we take a picture and we share it online, that's free publicity for nature. But I think that's kind of a funny way of looking at it, but it is. Like every time I see someone else's picture of a trail, it makes me want to get out on the trails. And I know I've had so much feedback from people, especially people that don't live in the UK, who see my pictures of the beautiful trails that I walk on and run on, and they say, I wish I could visit you. I wish I could go walking with you because the places that I share are so beautiful. So it's free publicity for your local nature. I think that's good because if we can encourage more people to get outdoors, it's going to change their lives, it's going to change their relationship with the environment, and it's going to ultimately help the environment. So those are some of the things that we give, for better or for worse, without realizing it or without really being conscious of it. So maybe be aware of those things the next time you go out into nature. Be aware of the fact that every time you breathe, which is not something you're doing consciously, but every time you go out and you're breathing outdoors, you're giving a little gift to the trees and the plants. Your gaze upon this nature is giving it your own kind of appreciation. Your voice is joining the sounds of the woods, or wherever it is that you're walking. Your energy is mingling with the energy of the trees and the plants and birds and the animals and everything else. Your footprints. Be aware of where you step. If you walk a dog, be mindful of what you do with the waste. Trash. Be mindful of things not falling off your pack. And publicity. Be conscious of how you share things on social media and be aware that by sharing these pictures, even if it's just one, you could make someone's life a little bit better by encouraging them to get outdoors, by inspiring them to get outdoors. So what can we give consciously? Some of the things are related to things that I've just said. So respect the trails. So in the UK, a public right-of-way, like a public footpath, technically is 1 meter wide. So if there's a muddy trail that's about 1 meter wide, and you're trying to avoid the mud, and you widen the trail by stepping alongside the mud, and everyone else does the same, little by little, that trail just widens and widens and widens, and a lot of these trails go through private property. So you're eroding and degrading a trail that it's a public right-of-way, but technically it's part of someone's land. So respect the trails, not just because the land belongs to someone else, but respect the trails because it's Mother Earth. Be mindful of where you step and don't widen trails. That's something that I never thought about really until I took my Lowland Leader, did my Lowland Leader certification, 3 years ago. And that was something that I learned there about, the trails are 1 meter wide and be aware of how you treat the trails. And ever since then, it's really changed my perspective of how I walk on trails. Trash. So in addition to keeping your own trash safe inside a zipper, you can clean up other people's junk. I don't always do this. I would like to do it more, but I pretty much always carry a small bin bag in my backpack. And whenever I'm walking a trail and I see more rubbish than I normally see, or when it becomes kind of conscious, like, oh God, there's a bottle and there's a bag and there's a wrapper, I just pull out my bag and start picking up stuff. And often it doesn't take too long to fill the bag. So if you can get into the habit of keeping a small bag with you, you don't have to go out and fill a huge bag full of trash, but something small, on your regular walk. Just have a little bag with you and pick up some stuff, something that's lightweight that you can carry around. Or every once in a while, you can drive somewhere and bring a big bag and just go and dedicate some time to cleaning up the trails. Yeah, ideally people would do this themselves and pack out the same stuff that they pack in, but we know that doesn't happen. So some of us have to make an extra effort. So that's another thing that you can give back consciously to the environment by picking up trash. Next, you can help keep invasive plants or non-native plants in check. And this is something that, again, I never really thought about until last year. I was out on one of my outdoors classes. I think it was wildlife tracking, and I forget where we were. We were in this place that I hadn't been before, and we were walking around, and there was this flower, and I don't even remember what the flower was, but I kind of bent down to look at it, and I was like, oh, what a pretty flower. And one of the guys in my course has a degree in ecology, and he works in ecology, and he came by, walked up next to me, had this little pocket knife, and he pulled it out, and he just clipped off the flower head, and he was like, non-native, invasive. And I was like, oh, I was just looking at the flower. And his attitude was, this is a non-native species. It could technically be invasive. It doesn't belong here. Boom, he clipped off the flower so it couldn't seed. And that was another point where I kind of went, oh, I never thought about that. So obviously you don't want to go on public land and private land and start ripping up invasive species. But if you do see a flower like that you know is not native, clip off its flowers and take them home with you, or just leave them. But don't allow them to go to seed. That's one thing you could do. It's a very small thing, and of course you have to know your plants. You have to be able to ID your plants. But that's something that I'd never thought of before that has kind of stuck in my head as a very small thing that you could do. You could also donate to local charities that care for the land. So wildlife trusts that are in your area, do some research and donate some money, or maybe donate to places that plant trees or just care for the land in your area. That's really, really a good type of organization to donate to if you can, because that's giving back to the land that you're walking through. Also, you can volunteer. Obviously, now in times of COVID, that's not really happening, but hopefully within the next few months or the next year, we'll be able to go back to doing things like that. You can volunteer to plant trees. You can volunteer to take care of places in the outdoors. Leave no trace. And that's something that I blogged about a little bit, and I talk about it from time to time, but it's something to keep in mind. So whenever you go out, just leave no trace of your presence. It's not hard, but a lot of people don't do it. So it's something to think about. There are 7 basic principles of leave no trace. 1 is plan ahead and prepare. Next is travel and camp on durable surfaces. 3rd is dispose of waste properly. 4, leave what you find. 5, minimize campfire impacts. 6, respect wildlife. And be considerate of other visitors. So a lot of this stuff is common sense, but do some research if you're afraid that you might not know how to properly leave no trace. Just Google leave no trace, 7 principles, and there's tons of stuff online. I also have a blog post that I will link to in the show notes about applying the concept of leave no trace to rituals and leaving offerings at sacred sites. So I'll link to that in the show notes because I've definitely changed the way I leave offerings based on wanting to apply the concepts of leave no trace. Next thing, and this is something that I never really thought about until I read this blog post by Dana Driscoll. She's an American druid, and she has been blogging for years on a blog called The Druid's Garden. And I will link to this article in the show notes. So this particular article talks about druid tree workings and establishing deep connections with trees. This is a great article. I agree with so much of it. But one of the things that she suggests is giving to the trees in the form of nitrogen. So trees obviously take in our carbon dioxide, but they can also take in the nitrogen that we pee. It's a great source of nourishment. So another way to give back consciously is to pee at the base of a tree. I often used to feel bad hiding behind a tree to have a wild pee, but then after I read this article, I realized, of course, it's a great source of nitrogen. Don't pee directly on the leaves because it'll burn them, but you can go on the soil around the tree, around the base of the tree. Just a thought. It's also a great way to hide behind the trunk of the tree as you do your thing. So, pee. Another thing you can do is give offerings, and offerings don't have to be elaborate. You could sing a little song as you walk down the trails. You could do a little dance. You could touch the trees as they go by. That's one of the things that the trees said to me that they liked when I was researching my book, If Trees Could Talk. You can also bring little dried plants or herbs from your garden. Again, you're going to want to avoid flowers with seeds because you don't want to be seeding non-native things in the wild. But a lot of people will give dried tobacco that they've grown themselves as an offering. Gratitude. You can simply give gratitude to the trails, to the outdoors, to nature. You can say thanks to the trees, say thanks to the plants, the birds, as you walk. I often just talk to the trees as I'm walking down a trail. So you can say that silently in your mind, or you can say it out loud. And just feel that sense of gratitude for the trails, for nature, for all of these beautiful places. You can also help a tree seed itself elsewhere and pick up some of its acorns or its seeds and carry them down the trail in a similar environment. You don't want to take them out to another environment, but you can perhaps 500 meters down the trail, leave the acorns or the seeds or the nuts and help the tree to spread its seeds and nuts. Finally, remember that each picture that you take, each photo of nature that you share on social media is free publicity for the outdoors. So when you share your photos, share them with that intention that they help others get outdoors too, that they help other people to connect with nature, that they help other people to enjoy the trails. A lot of us do this anyway, but we don't consciously realize the impact of our actions. And so I think that's a really great way to give back. So it's pretty much all I have to say on the topic, but I would really like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this? Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about what we give the trails without realizing it? And did you think of anything else that we give as I was talking? It was really, really hard for me to come up with some of this stuff because some of it's good, some of it's bad, and some of it is so subtle, like carbon dioxide. And if you have any other ideas for ways that we can consciously give back to nature and to the trails, please let me know. Again, you can email me at holly@hollyworton.com and get in touch there. And if you have any ideas like this or something else, or if you have further questions about any of the topics that I've already covered, please get in touch and let me know, because I would love to go deeper on some of these topics if I see that there's interest. So, thank you so much for listening. And next week's episode is number 400, and so I'm probably going to do that one myself. But like I said, I have some very interesting guests lined up, and I'm really excited about that. In the meantime, remember to visit hollyworton.com/399 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.